Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Tales of Herding God Part 156 based on novel. So let's start. When the divine flood dragon king saw Qin Mu also lying on the floor and acting dead, he was at a loss. He was a god, the divine flood dragon king, the esteemed god of the flood dragons. So how could he escape from trouble by shamelessly playing dead like Hu Linga and the rest? Thump. The divine flood dragon king collapsed onto the floor, his limbs distorting. His death seemed to be even more miserable than that of Qin Mu, which made it evident it wasn't his first time playing dead. The huge head came down, but its eyes seemed to be bad. The giant face literally brushed across everyone's bodies as they held their breaths and remained motionless. Ish. The stone statue let out a long hiss before slowly straightening up to walk into the darkness. The thumping footsteps gradually went away. This stone statue seems to be looking for something. Qin Mu jumped up and pondered over it. Where did it come from? Great ruins? Or another world? What is it looking for? Hu Linga and all of the flood dragons crawled up, while the divine flood dragon king patted the dust off his body. Hu Linga praised him, divine flood dragon king, among all of us, you're the best at playing dead. You must have practiced it many times. When you are free, you must teach me more. The divine flood dragon king's face flushed and he muttered, I did not, don't talk nonsense. Playing dead is all about talent. Qin Mu walked away while saying, let's continue our search. Everyone be careful, since we don't know if there are other stone statues here. Divine Flood Dragon King, what's your opinion of the one we saw earlier? The Divine Flood Dragon King thought for a moment before saying, that stone statue is most likely not from Great Ruins. Qin Mu was slightly stunned. Not from Great Ruins. Why do you say so? The stone statues in Great Ruins brave the wind and rain, frost and cold, so all of them are very old and worn down. But this stone statue was quite clean and fresh, as though it had just become a stone statue. But the divine flood dragon king couldn't be sure. However, there are also stone statues in Great Ruins that are most peculiar, so it could be one which hides in some sealed space where the elements cannot reach it. Qin Mu muttered to himself irresolutely as he pondered over it. Could there have been numerous stone statues hidden under God-broken mountain range? When it was destroyed, could they have risen up? It's a possibility, the divine flood dragon king said. Your Majesty, dragon-rearing sovereign had once said that the origin of God-broken mountain range was very fishy. It surrounded Great Ruins, separating it an eternal peace. Great Ruins was in a piece of chaos, yet it was peaceful outside it. So there definitely had to be something wrong with God-broken mountain range. As they entered deeper into the strange place, the grey fog and the darkness grew thicker and thicker. The air was filled with a dullness that could make one go crazy, and from time to time, trembling from earthquake cauldron would come from afar. Qin Mu headed toward the tremors, and not long after, they encountered a second stone statue. It also seemed to be searching for something. Divine Flood Dragon King's words make sense. Qin Mu avoided the stone statue, and thought to himself, these stone statues are most likely from under the God-broken mountain range. A mountain range being able to hold back the peculiarity of Great Ruins was strange by itself. On what did it rely on to block the darkness of Great Ruins? Since Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor had used Earthquake Cauldron to shatter God-broken mountain range, the darkness of Great Ruins had expanded by 100 miles. Just from this point, it could be seen that God-broken mountain range had really possessed the ability to block the darkness. The mountain range should have appeared after founding Emperor Empire was wiped out and become Great Ruins. Qin Mu had once heard people saying that some god had created God-broken mountain range to separate eternal peace and Great Ruins, and prevent people from great ruins to come in. When they created the mountains, they reached Mount Meru's area, but because there was someone on top of Great Thunderclap Monastery, they took a detour. It couldn't be said for sure, but the god who had created the mountain range might have also buried numerous stone statues underneath it. Young master, could this stone statue be one of those that popped up in Eternal Peace Empire? Hu Ling'er asked. As Qin Mu froze, stunned, she added, it might be the god statues from near God-broken mountain range. Because many gods of high heavens and other strong practitioners had died here, the stone statues could use them as sacrificial offerings to come back to life. However, because the sacrifices weren't enough, they couldn't revive completely and can only move around. There's this possibility as well, Qin Mu said with some suspicion. If that's the case, what are the stone statues looking for? Of course it's the earthquake cauldron that shattered God-broken mountain range. Hu Ling'er said as though it was expected. Earthquake cauldron is their weapon, and they need to find it to release all of its power. Although Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor shattered God-broken mountain range, he definitely didn't release everything that was inside the cauldron. Ling'er is really smart. Qin Mu praised. The little fox was proud of herself. It's just that since the stone statues can move, why don't they look for other meteorological weapons? Qin Mu shook his head. Finding other weapons would be much easier. On top of that, this place is still trembling, so it's evident that Earthquake Cauldron is still releasing its power continuously. With that, it shouldn't be too difficult for the stone statues to find it from the direction of the tremors. Because of that, what you guessed should be wrong. Divine Flood Dragon King's guess is more logical. Hu Ling'er's proudness vanished without a trace. Suddenly, Qin Mu stopped and collapsed to the floor to play dead again. Incomparably heavy footsteps came from in front of them as a tall stone statue walked toward them. Qin Mu narrowed his eyes and saw that the back of that stone statue was filled with flags. They had also petrified, but there was a huge eye on each and every flag, which looked very strange. Lumps of black chi poured into the flags behind the stone statue. With it, one of the eyes on a flag gradually transformed from rock into flesh and blood. The eye slowly became a true eye. It rolled around in the flag, looking very rough. It was obvious that the energy wasn't enough for it to completely break free of its petrified state. Devil Eye. The stone statue is a devil. Qin Mu's scalp crawled and he almost jumped up. Since it was a devil, it definitely couldn't be a stone statue from under God-broken mountain range. What walked in great ruins in the darkness were the monsters of the devil race. They weren't afraid of the strangeness, because they were the peculiarity themselves. Qin Mu once met a devil god in the darkness, and he had lured them forward, making him mistake the outskirts of Fengju as carefree village. Village chief had even fought with him. That's not right. If these stone statues are devil gods, why did they become stone statues? The devil gods I saw in the past were all full of vigor. All kinds of thoughts jumped around in his head, and he suddenly thought of a possibility. The world of the stone statues wasn't the one overlapping with great ruins and eternal peace. They weren't the devil gods from great ruins, but had come from another world. Because they traversed into another world, their corporeal bodies turned into stone and their power still remained outside. What exactly is going on in this place? Qin Mu's mind was groggy. At night in Great Ruins, there were 3 to 5 different worlds, but now that God-broken mountain range had crumbled, a new world had shown up. Is that new world going to overlap with eternal peace? Why did such an unimaginable thing happen? Just as he thought this far, the devil eye on the flag rolled to survey the surroundings. Suddenly, its gaze landed on Qin Mu and the rest who were playing dead on the ground, and playfulness appeared in it. Fear struck Qin Mu's heart. The flag suddenly fell off the back of the stone statue, and landed right in front of them. Qin Mu abandoned his plans to play dead and immediately rose while shouting, "Divine Flood Dragon King." The Divine Flood Dragon King instantly transformed back into his original form when he heard him. Qin Mu brought Hu Linga to jump onto it while the dragon Qilin led the other flood dragons to climb up the dragon's back. The Divine Flood Dragon then whooshed and rushed away. Behind them, the stone statue turned around and its hand slammed down at an extremely fast speed. The Divine Flood Dragon King roared, and all his vital chi exploded, turning into a torrenting flood. It transformed into a long river, which quickly coiled around the arm of the stone statue, trying to crush it. The arm of that stone statue bent and straightened, and with that, the divine art of the Divine Flood Dragon King was shattered. He felt his blood ran cold and shouted, "Your Majesty, it's a true god. It should be a true devil." Qin Mu corrected him. The stone statue raised its feet and caught up to them in a few steps. The other hand came slamming down, and the Divine Flood Dragon King avoided the strike. In the meantime, the flag soared into the sky before landed on the ground. The devil eye on it continued to stare at the group. When the Divine Flood Dragon King escaped a certain distance away, the petrified flag would soar up once again and land close to them. It was like a hopping flag. The stone statue is relying on that eye to see. Without it, the devil god won't be able to locate us. Qin Mu instantly came to a realization and took out Sun Jade Eye from his Dao Tai sack. He immediately placed it eye on the dragon's back and activated it without a word. A beam of sun divine ray tore apart the darkness and the fog, slicing at the eye on the flag. A black ray instantly shot out from the devil eye as well, blocking the sun divine ray. Qin Mu grabbed Moon Jade Eye with his other hand and adjusted its direction. A thin light blade shot out from Moon Jade Eye, and wherever it passed by, space would literally solidify into substance. The rays from 1A and a moon instantly tore apart the black ray from the devil eye and shattered the eye. The petrified flag was left with only a broken hole. Using Moon Jade Eye and Sun Jade Eye together seems to result in an even greater power. Qin Mu suppressed the astonishment in his heart and raised his head to look at the stone statue. Its movements suddenly stopped, and it tilted its ears as though it was trying to hear something. "Don't move," Qin Mu whispered under his breath. The Divine Flood Dragon King immediately stopped and Qin Mu said softly, "Slowly walk, don't hurry." The Divine Flood Dragon King slowly crept forward in fear of making any sound while Qin Mu stared intensely at the stone statue. It seemed to be looking around, smashing here and kicking there, but it didn't notice them. Suddenly, the Divine Flood Dragon King's body paused and he said in a trembling voice, "Your Majesty. Continue walking." Qin Mu didn't turn back his head. "Your Majesty, look ahead," the Divine Flood Dragon King croaked. Hu Linga's voice was also trembling. "Young Master, look ahead." "Ahead?" Qin Mu was slightly stunned and turned back to look before them. As his eyes caught sight of what the others were referring to, he couldn't help staring blankly, all his sense having flown out. Behind them, the stone statue pummeled everything and shattered the whole place, slowly closing in on them. Yet Qin Mu seemed to feel nothing. After some time, he muttered, "Imperial Preceptor, what have you done?" In front of them, the sky and the land seemed to be connected together. The already strange sight was made even more shocking by a huge hole blown between them. It was difficult to describe it since the sky was empty before, so how could a hole be blown through it? The land was incomparably thick. It couldn't be penetrated even if a huge hole had been drilled through it, which presented another kind of inconceivable and impressive sight. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor had to have used Earthquake Cauldron at the crucial moment, borrowing the divine art of the meteorological weapon to pierce through the land and the sky of this world and another world, creating the magnificent sight of the two coming together. Furthermore, The power of Earthquake Cauldron was extremely great, to the extent that the wound between two worlds still hadn't recovered. The barriers of the two worlds couldn't heal themselves. In front of the huge hole, great ruins and eternal peace were at night, while behind the hole, there was a sun rising, shining on a black and tall devil castle. The sky of the other world was situated under the horizon of God-Broken Mountain Range, while the land was in the sky above God-Broken Mountain Range. From Qin Mu's angle, he could see the land of that world, and there were all kinds of sharp buildings which looked like long knives, long swords and spears. Those buildings were 10,000 feet tall, and were built with great denseness. It was a completely different style of construction compared to that in Eternal Peace. Grand and sinister devil castles were situated up and down huge mountains extending without end into the distance. Some of them were even floating in the sky. Sunlight shone on them, casting shadows on God-Broken Mountain Range. The trees and mountains of that world had abnormal shapes. They were twisted and terrifying. Sunlight from the other world shone over from the ground and hit the bodies of Qin Mu and the rest. Standing in front of the incomparably huge circular hole, they were miniature like ants. The sunlight from the other world lengthened their shadows, but compared to the hole, the shadows were incomparably fine. Under their feet was the sun and the land was above their heads. It was like they were standing in front of a mirror, which reflected things upside down. On top of that, the hole was still trembling gently, making the rocks in the surroundings of God-Broken Mountain Range rise in the air from the continuous shakes. The bodies of Qin Mu and the rest turned numb from the tremors, and their primordial spirits grew unstable. One could only imagine what terrifying energy had been unleashed when Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor had used Earthquake Cauldron. The earthquakes here are coming from the hole. It isn't Imperial Preceptor, who's still using Earthquake Cauldron. Qin Mu's heart sank. After going into God-Broken Mountain Range, he sensed tremors from time to time and thought that Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor was still using Earthquake Cauldron. Never did he expect them to be coming from the hole that connected two worlds. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor wasn't there, and his life and death were unknown. Qin Mu raised his head and looked at the land floating in the sky. A powerful devil god stood there, sending out his primordial spirit as his corporeal body petrified. There were numerous strangely shaped devils that were like hard-working ants surrounding the devil god's petrified body to construct a large sacrificial altar. Tens of thousands of slaves were led up them to be executed, creating the blood sacrifice to send the devil god's stone statue over. A wizard wearing white bones and feathers on his head was casting a spell on the large sacrificial altar. The sight of blood flowing around it was captured in the eyes of Qin Mu and the rest. It was a kind of cruel beauty. The sight was shocking, cruel, and terrifying. That world was still in a barbaric and bloody era. Their divine arts were very primitive and reeked of blood. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor can be said to have brought huge trouble. Qin Mu's scalp crawled. Earthquake Cauldron had opened a passageway to another world, and there seemed to be numerous devil gods in that world. When they saw the world of Eternal Peace Empire, they were naturally happy at seeing a new prey. Desire to conquer rose in their hearts, and they didn't hesitate to even petrify their bodies to send themselves to eternal peace. However, what was weird was that after the stone statues of the devil gods passed through, they didn't try to execute an even larger sacrifice to open up the hole created by Earthquake Cauldron. Instead, they were searching around for something. Besides, it's such a huge hole, so why can't we see any devils coming through it? Qin Mu was puzzled. The Divine Flood Dragon King seemed to have discovered something, for he said, "Your Majesty, the army of the devils is on the sacrificial altar over there." Qin Mu looked in the direction, and his heart filled with fear. The slaves of the devil world were constructing a large sacrificial altar that was numerous times larger than the one he'd seen earlier. Its body was like a huge mountain shaved flat, and tens of thousands of devil wizards were floating around, using the blood of the slaves to paint various runes. Meanwhile, at the border of the sacrificial altar, the devil army was walking with grandeur toward the center. They had to be preparing to use the opportunity presented to them to send their army into eternal peace. Could it be that they can't cross this hole, and have to rely on the power of blood sacrifice for their warriors to pass? Qin Mu stared blankly. He stretched his hand out to try to cross into the other world, but he met an invisible barrier. There was clearly another world in front of him, but he couldn't enter it. The divine flood Dragon King and the Dragon Qin also tried it. The stronger they were, the stronger the resistance. They couldn't enter another's time and space. Suddenly, they heard a loud sound as though a heavy object had landed on the ground. It startled Qin Mu and the rest back to their senses. A devil god's stone statue had been sent over from the world on the other side. The 300 yards tall stone statue stood quietly to their right, about 300 yards away. On its surface, runes formed by fresh blood moved continuously and changed shape, gradually sinking into the stone. The statue suddenly twitched and slowly moved its body. It was evident that the wizards in the other world had used the slaves as blood sacrifices to give it the ability to move by itself. It's just that the devil gods still couldn't transfer their massive energy over, so the stone statues couldn't change back to their corporeal bodies. Quickly, go! The divine flood Dragon King immediately sprinted into the distance, circling the huge hole. Qin Mu stood on its back and looked behind them. He saw the stone statue bend down and crawl toward the earth. Its arms pushed into the earth like drills, and soon the whole stone statue went headfirst into the earth. In no time, there was no longer any sign of it having ever been there. This stone statue seems to be searching for something too. What is it exactly? Imperial Preceptor, Grandpa Blind, are they still all alive? If they are alive, where are they hiding? Qin Mu executed 9 heaven's divine eyes and carefully searched for traces of Imperial Preceptor and the rest. As they continued to head north, he saw more signs of battle. There were marks left behind by Butcher and Blind as they fought the gods of high heavens. Divine Flood Dragon King, be careful. Qin Mu saw a black line that was staying still in the air, and the Divine Flood Dragon King stopped. He was slightly stunned as he also saw something wrong. He went around the black line. When his line of sight shifted, he saw the black line become wider. It was a knife light that had paused in the air. It had sliced apart space, but then got stuck. However, the power of the divine art in the knife didn't fade away, so the space couldn't heal. What a terrifying knife skill! The Divine Flood Dragon King couldn't help shivering. Such a knife skill could be known as a divine knife. When it reached the realm of Tao, it was invulnerable and extremely terrifying. Grandpa Butcher is heaven knife, and this is pig slaughtering knife skills. Qin Mu couldn't help exclaiming in astonishment. He had also learned pig slaughtering knife skills before, but he could never match Butcher's level. Butcher's knife was too wild. Even if other people learned his skills, it would be difficult for them to unleash their power. Only by becoming as crazy as Butcher could they unleash the power of his knife skills. Next, the group saw a sea of scorching flames smelting the mountains. Even the darkness found it difficult to consume that sea of flames. Grandpa Mute's furnace has been shattered. Qin Mu was astonished. The reason for the sea of flames was Mute's furnace. Once it shattered, the flames inside spilled out in all directions. Could Grandpa Mute have died? They crossed the sea of flames, and Qin Mu suddenly saw old Rulai. He was sitting in a lotus position, with 20 heavens surrounding him. Gods and Buddhas of all sizes sat in his surroundings. Beside them was a god of high heavens, and the two men were facing each other. For a moment, Qin Mu was stunned, then sighed. He bowed at old Rulai and picked him up to bring him to the divine flood dragon king's back. They then continued on their way. Hu Linga turned her head back to ask curiously, "Young master, why is that old monk not moving and even need you to carry him?" Qin Mu shook his head and said, "He has already taken that god down with him." Hu Linga was stunned. Not long later, Qin Mu saw old Tao master. The old Daoist was clutching a sword technique, with one hand and holding a sword with another. There was a celestial air to him, as he stood with his head raised to look at the god, who had pulled half of his body out from the mountain he had possessed. There was a smile on old Tao master's face. Divine lights shot off from Qin Mu's eyes, and he saw that the heart of the god's brows had been pierced by a sword. The wound left behind was very fine and hard to notice. He looked at old Tao master and saw that his body was tattered. There were injuries everywhere, but they were no longer bleeding. "Is the old Daoist still alive?" Hu Linga asked. Qin Mu shook his head and walked down to bring old Tao master up, while saying softly, "His blood ran out. His last attack must have changed his primordial spirit into a sword, which he stabbed into the heart of that god's brows. His primordial spirit transformed into Tao after the stab, and exploded with power, destroying itself as well. Once the power of the move was exhausted, the primordial spirit also dispersed. People who walk different paths cannot make plans together. Even though Heavenly Devil Cult and Tao Sex paths were different, Qin Mu was still extremely respectful to this old Tao master. Hu Linga became solemn and straightened her clothes. She then bowed respectfully to old Tao master. A high-minded and righteous person in his old age, one with heart full of fierce passion. Salute. When the flood dragons saw this, they all stood up on their hind legs and cupped their claws together. Maha. They continued to walk forward until they saw a huge snake lying on the ground. It was Willow Immortal. The group saw less and less of the stone statues from the other world, but the atmosphere became more and more somber. The corners of Qin Mu's eyes wrinkled in fear of seeing the corpses of Cripple, Granny Sai, and the rest. He dragged Willow Immortal on the divine Flood Dragon King's back as well. Village chief said that there needed to be a person to collect the corpses. "Senior Sister Willow Immortal, I'm here. Follow me home." They then saw White Immortal, who was covered in silver-colored spikes upon which a ball of thread was tangled. He held a plate with silver needles in his hand. There was a huge hole in his chest, a hand still sticking out from it. He had to have killed his opponent, and not expected him to still manage to take his life before succumbing to death. The surroundings were completely silent, with only mountain rocks floating in the darkness and fog. Qin Mu and the rest walked over, and a magnetic force under their feet seemed to vanish. There was a strange force field there, and Qin Mu raised his head to look at the stars. Great overarching heavenly stars. Granny, his heart couldn't help skipping a beat. Updated by novelfull.com. Above them was the starry sky formed by great overarching heavenly stars palm force, and he saw Granny Sai sitting motionlessly in the starry sky. The beautiful woman had her palms stretched out as if she had just used her art. She looked magnificent. Qin Mu suppressed the unease in his heart, and shifted his gaze from Granny Sai's body. He then saw Butcher with his knife standing on a heavenly star. His body was tall and sturdy. The two knives were side by side, but he didn't move as well. Qin Mu then saw Hermit Qingyu. He was wielding a horsetail whisk, which at that moment was placed next to his elbow. He sat in a lotus position, and the thing upon which he was sitting was also a star. Next, Qin Mu saw Mute standing on a fire star of great overarching heavenly stars. Qin Mu's heart shook violently, and he nearly vomited blood. He shifted his gaze with difficulty, and saw Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor. The man sat on Earthquake Cauldron below, which was one of the stars of great overarching heavenly stars. Qin Mu shifted his gaze from his body and saw Rat Immortal, Fox Immortal, and the other people. Cripple had brought Apothecary, who was still bleeding, to sit on one of the stars as well. Blind had his head lowered while leaning on his bamboo cane. There was also a star under his feet. Old Ma was like a Buddha, Deaf was holding onto a brush, Queen Yi held her wing knife, and King Kuan still possessed the horn on his head. They were also within great overarching heavenly stars that had burst forth from Granny Sai's palm. Each and every one of them was standing on a star. Where's Sister Jing? Why is she not here? Qin Mu hurriedly looked around, trying to find traces of Yang Jingjing. Even if it was Sun's ship, it couldn't block the gods of high heavens, right? Suddenly, a beam of bright light swept past them, and Qin Mu saw a sun. It was half black, so only when it turned over were they basked in its bright rays. Sun's ship was extremely huge, so even if its body was blocked by a mountain peak, the sunlight could still be faintly seen coming from the other side. Yet Sun's ship showed no movement. Its aura could not be felt. Qin Mu's heart suddenly sank. Hu Linger at that moment said, "Young master, I don't see yellow immortal untuxing foam." Qin Mu composed himself and continued to look around with the two divine rays shooting out from his eyes. He saw a god standing behind Granny Sai with his fingers put together like a sword, pointing at the back of her head. Yet that god was frozen in place and couldn't move. Next, Qin Mu saw Flower Sovereign of High Heavens. She was a woman with flowers blooming under her feet, filling the sky as though they had grown from the sky. She stood upside down on one of the flowers, as though she was walking on the sky to attack great overarching heavenly star force field. Yet she also was frozen, not moving at all. Qin Mu then saw a third god, which was in the sky above Sun's ship. He was stretching his claws out as though to attack someone on the ship. Yet he was also frozen in the air. Qin Mu looked farther back and saw other gods of high heavens. They were in different poses, like they had been caught in the middle of battle. Not one god was still able to move. Are they dead? Qin Mu wanted to stabilize his mind, but he kept finding it hard to do so. This sight was simply too peculiar. Everyone was standing motionless as though time had stopped. But if the time had truly stopped, how were Qin Mu and the rest not affected? Your Majesty, they should still be alive, the divine flood dragon king suddenly said. I can still feel their aura. Their breaths are long and drawn out. Only a few of them don't have any breath left. What's weird is that their primordial spirits are not in their bodies. It's as if they had been pulled out from within them. Qin Mu was slightly stunned. Primordial spirits were pulled out of their bodies. The divine flood dragon king nodded and said, there are no primordial spirits in these bodies. I can guess from Granny Sai and Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's positions that it should be some sort of primordial spirit formation. When their divine arts suddenly burst forth, everyone's primordial spirits were forcefully dragged out of their bodies. If I were to continue with this guess, their injuries had to have been so severe that they could only decide to use primordial spirits to fight. Qin Mu let out a sigh of relief, and his heart relaxed a little. They aren't dead, they are just fighting with their primordial spirits. Divine Flood Dragon King, you are more knowledgeable in this, do you know where their primordial spirits go? The speed of a primordial spirit is very fast. It can travel tens of thousands of miles in a flash, moving through the boundless void. So their primordial spirits shouldn't be here. Their destination is not something I could know. Qin Mu was stumped for words. The next moment though, he asked in an astringent voice, which of them have no more breath left? The divine flood dragon king pointed at Apothecary, then Cripple, Deaf, King Kuan, and Rat Immortal. Qin Mu's heart became heavier and heavier. There are also some gods of high heavens who have no more breath left. Their primordial spirits must have lost the battle, the divine flood dragon king said in a low voice. Qin Mu's face darkened, and he rose to reach Sun's ship. He saw that everyone on it was frozen. From that, it was obvious that when Granny Sai and the rest have executed the primordial spirit formation, the primordial spirits of everyone in the surroundings were brought away, no matter if they were mortals or gods. This video will end here.